The young widow who sold firewood. The sun rose slowly over the small village of Nyaru. Smoke curled from the clay huts and the faint sound of drums echoed from a distant gathering. Mariam tightened the bundle of firewood on her back and stepped onto the dusty path that led to the market. Her children clung to her skirt, their eyes wide but silent. The youngest, little Cato, had a cough that worried her. The market was alive with the cries of sellers and the chatter of villagers, but Mariam felt invisible. Every day, she walked this path, carrying firewood from the forest beyond the hills. She stacked it carefully, hoping someone would notice the quality of the wood. But most days, people passed her by. Some laughed at her thin frame. Some whispered about her being a widow. After the death of her husband, Mariam had been left to care for her children alone. The village elders had offered their condolences and moved on, and her own relatives had avoided her, unwilling to help with the burden of grief and poverty. Mariam's hands were blistered and sore from chopping and bundling the wood. She remembered the mornings when her husband, Oba, would carry the wood together with her. They had dreamed of a small shop, of a life that would give their children enough to go to school. But Oba had been taken suddenly by a fever that no healer could cure. Since then, Mariam had become the backbone of her family, though every step forward seemed weighed down by despair. As she arrived at the market, she laid the bundles neatly in a corner. Other sellers sold maize, cassava, and fish, shouting over each other to attract attention. Mariam did not shout. She simply sat, letting her presence be known through the simple honesty of her work. Villagers glanced at her and walked on. Some muttered cruel words. "Still alive, Mariam? How long before the forest swallows you like your husband?" A group of children laughed and threw stones at her bundles. She ignored them, but inside her chest, a quiet anger burned. While she waited, Mariam remembered her mother's words. Courage is not in the loud voice but in the patient heart. A clever mind can change the world quietly. She thought about the herbs and remedies her family had always kept for generations. Some used them for sickness, some to protect crops, but the knowledge had faded as life became busier and younger people moved to the city. Mariam had learned enough as a child to notice patterns. She knew what would kill pests and what would nourish the soil. She had dismissed it as a memory, until the morning she spotted the worms eating Farmer Aid's cassava. Farmer Aid was shouting in frustration. His crops were his pride, the hope of his family for the year. Mariam approached quietly. "I can help," she said softly. Aid looked at her, surprise and skepticism mingling in his eyes. "You?" he said. "A widow with firewood?" Mariam nodded. She remembered the old recipes her grandmother used for the garden. A mixture of crushed leaves, ground roots, and water could protect the crops without poisoning them. She had only to trust herself and act. The first attempt was tentative. Mariam spent the day gathering the ingredients, mixing them with care, and sprinkling the solution over Aid's plants. By evening, the worms had retreated. Aid could not believe his eyes. "What magic is this?" he asked. Mariam only smiled. "It is knowledge from the earth. My family has known it for years. I only remembered." Word spread quickly in the village. By the next market day, villagers approached her not to laugh or scorn, but to ask for help. Mariam felt a strange mix of pride and fear. She had always thought her life would remain simple and unnoticed. Now, the villagers looked to her for advice. Some carried her mixtures into their fields. Others brought seeds and begged for guidance. For the first time since Oba's death, Mariam felt that her life had purpose beyond mere survival. But with new attention came whispers of suspicion. Some elders questioned her methods. Some rival sellers saw her as a threat. One afternoon, a group of young men from the village confronted her at the market. "Who gave you the right to interfere with our crops?" they demanded. Mariam stood firm, her hands on her hips. "I only share what I know," she said calmly. "If you wish to ignore it, your losses will be your own." The men laughed and walked away, muttering threats. But something had changed. The villagers were beginning to see Mariam not as a widow or a firewood seller, but as someone clever, someone capable, someone who had risen from the shadows. By nightfall, Mariam returned home to her children. Cato had fallen asleep, his small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of deep sleep. Mariam felt the weight of the day, but also a strange spark of hope. She realized that life in Nyar could be cruel and dismissive, yet even in the smallest acts, chopping wood, mixing herbs, helping a neighbor, she could find power. As she closed her eyes that night, she did not know what the next day would bring, but she sensed a shift in the village. The same people who had mocked her might soon need her in ways they could not yet imagine. Late into the night, as the wind rustled through the trees, Mariam heard a commotion near the granary. Shadows moved quickly. Someone was stealing the newly harvested crops. Her heart raced. She grabbed her lantern and ran toward the noise, her mind sharp despite her exhaustion. What she saw made her stop in shock. A group of masked figures were carrying away sacks of cassava and millet. Mariam knew she could not fight them alone. She needed help, but whom could she trust in the dark? The secret hero emerges. Mariam's heart pounded as she crouched behind a tree near the granary. The masked figures moved quickly, their sacks heavy with stolen crops. The moonlight reflected off the blades some of them carried. Fear surged through her body, but a fiercer sense of determination took hold. She had survived the mockery, the loneliness, the endless struggles for her children. She could not let these thieves destroy the village's harvest. She ran silently back to her hut, her children still sleeping. Mariam grabbed her grandmother's old satchel and filled it with the strongest herbs she could find. She remembered the old mixtures used to ward off pests. Perhaps they could be used to scare away these men. She tied her scarf tightly over her mouth and nose and returned to the granary, her footsteps muffled in the soft earth. As she neared the thieves, Mariam took a deep breath and threw a handful of crushed leaves toward them. The pungent scent hit their faces and eyes. Coughing and swearing, they staggered backward. Mariam ran forward, picking up a long stick to swing at the nearest sack. One of the men lunged at her, but she sidestepped and struck his arm with the stick. The sack tore, spilling grains across the ground. The men panicked, dropping the rest of their haul and fleeing into the night. The village was quiet except for the faint rustle of fleeing footsteps. Mariam's body shook from the adrenaline, but a smile of triumph spread across her face. She bent down, picking up the scattered grains and carrying them back to the granary. The moonlight revealed the damage, but the bulk of the harvest had been saved. Her heart soared with pride, yet a deep fear lingered. Who were these thieves? Would they return? The next morning, Mariam woke to whispers outside her hut. Neighbors and farmers had gathered near the granary. Their eyes were wide with awe and disbelief. "It is true," said Farmer Aid. "The firewood seller saved our harvest last night." Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. Mariam stepped forward cautiously, her hands still carrying a small bundle of grains. No one had expected her to be capable of such bravery. The village elders arrived shortly after. Elder Tay, the oldest man in Nyaru, looked down at her with a mixture of respect and surprise. "Mariam," he said slowly, "you have acted with courage that none of us could have imagined. You have saved what is most precious to our people. Tell us how you did it." Mariam explained the herbs, the mixtures, and how she had used them to drive away the thieves. She spoke with calm authority, and for the first time, her voice carried weight. Word of Mariam's courage spread quickly. The next market day, people no longer ignored her. Villagers approached her with questions and requests for help. Farmers asked for advice on crop protection, mothers asked about remedies for their children, and even the children who had thrown stones at her firewood bundles now looked at her with admiration. Mariam smiled, but kept her focus on her work, knowing that respect must be earned daily, not demanded. Despite her growing reputation, there were still whispers of doubt. Some rival sellers resented her sudden popularity. "She is a widow," one man said bitterly. "How can she know more than we do?" Another said, "Perhaps she got lucky. One night cannot make her a hero." Mariam ignored them. She had learned long ago that the world would always test the quiet strength of those who rose from humble beginnings. One afternoon, as she sold firewood and tended to the villagers' requests for advice, a small crowd gathered. A young girl approached her timidly, holding a wilted plant. "My father says it will die," she said softly. "Can you help it?" Mariam knelt and examined the plant. She recognized the signs of a pest infestation. Carefully, she prepared a mixture from her satchel and applied it to the plant. Within hours, the leaves began to straighten, the wilting slowed, and the girl's eyes lit with hope. By sunset, Mariam had begun to see her life change. She was no longer invisible. Her firewood, once ignored, was now sought after because people wanted to be near her, to watch and learn from her. But fame and respect also brought new challenges. That evening, as she walked home, she found a note pinned to her door with a sharp thorn. It read simply, "You are meddling where you should not. Stop, or face the consequences." Fear gripped her, but it did not stop her. Mariam knew that courage was not the absence of fear but the will to act despite it. The following days brought more attempts by thieves and rival villagers to undermine her. Some tried to tamper with her firewood. Others spread rumors that she had stolen the old family recipe. Mariam faced each challenge quietly, relying on her knowledge, her resourcefulness, and her unwavering dedication to her children and the village. One morning, Mariam noticed signs of damage in Farmer Aid's maize field. The stalks were bent, and the leaves had strange holes. She recognized the work of the same thieves from before, but this time their plan seemed more organized. Mariam knew she needed to act decisively. She gathered her mixtures, herbs, and bundles of firewood and set a trap. She waited until the first shadows appeared in the field. Then, as the intruders advanced, she threw a combination of crushed leaves and smoke from burning firewood toward them. The scent was overwhelming. They staggered, coughing, and fell into a pit she had dug behind the maize. The villagers arrived soon after, called by the noise and Mariam's shouts. They watched in amazement as Mariam stood over the captured thieves. "Do you see now?" she said firmly, "how knowledge, courage, and action can protect what is precious?" The elders nodded. Farmer Aid bowed his head in respect. The villagers clapped and cheered. Mariam, exhausted but proud, finally felt the full weight of her transformation. She was no longer just a widow with firewood. She was their protector, their secret hero. Yet even in this moment of triumph, Mariam sensed that her journey was far from over. That night, she sat by the fire with her children. Cato looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mother, will we always be safe now?" he asked. Mariam held him close. "We will face what comes together," she said, "and courage will guide us." Outside, shadows shifted near the edge of the village. Mariam's heart tightened. Someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. She could not see their face, but she felt the tension in the air. Rising respect and hidden dangers the next day brought an unexpected twist. Mariam woke before dawn, her children still asleep. The village was quiet, with only the faint crowing of roosters and the soft rustle of palm leaves. She felt a strange unease as she stepped outside, sensing that someone had been near her hut during the night. Her suspicions were confirmed when she noticed small footprints in the dirt, circling her home and disappearing into the tall grass at the edge of the village. Someone had been watching, studying her. Despite the unease, Mariam knew she could not let fear rule her life. She carried her bundles of firewood to the market as usual. Along the way, villagers greeted her with nods of respect. Mothers whispered thanks for the remedies she had given their children. Farmers sought her advice on crops, eager to learn more of her methods. Even the children, once bold enough to throw stones at her, now ran to help carry small sticks and bundles. Mariam smiled, but a tight knot of worry remained in her chest. At the market, a familiar figure approached. It was Elder Tay, the oldest man in Nyaru, known for his wisdom and impartial judgment. He looked serious, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Mariam. "Mariam," he said, "your courage and cleverness have brought honor to this village. But there are those who do not wish to see you succeed. They plan in secret. You must be vigilant." Mariam nodded solemnly. She had sensed this already. Her success had drawn envy and fear from those who felt threatened by a widow who had risen above her station. Later that afternoon, Mariam visited Farmer Aid's fields to check on the crops. The maize had grown taller and healthier than ever. The villagers had followed her instructions carefully, and her mixture had protected the plants from pests. Aid smiled and shook her hand. "You have done more than save my crops," he said. "You have given hope to all of us. I will tell everyone in the neighboring villages of your wisdom." Mariam felt warmth in her chest but kept her focus on the work. Fame could be fleeting. Respect had to be nurtured carefully, through action and integrity. As the sun dipped low, Mariam returned home to prepare the evening meal. She noticed a group of children gathered near the edge of the village, whispering and pointing toward the forest. Curiosity overcame her caution, and she approached. The children told her that strangers had been spotted moving through the trees, carrying bundles that looked suspiciously like stolen crops. Mariam's heart tightened. The thieves from before had returned, bolder and more organized. She knew she had to act quickly to protect the village. Mariam gathered her firewood, herbs, and makeshift weapons. She instructed some of the older boys in the village to help set traps and spread warning signals. She organized a plan that required careful timing and clever strategy. As night fell, the the shadows of the intruders moved closer. Mariam led a small group of villagers, hidden and silent, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the thieves entered the open space of the village square, she signaled with a sharp whistle. Smoke rose from hidden piles of herbs, filling the air with a pungent scent that made the intruders stagger and cough. The villagers moved quickly, driving the thieves toward the pit traps Mariam had prepared. One by one, they fell, captured by their own greed and underestimation of a widow's courage. Mariam's heart raced, but she maintained control. She had learned that fear could paralyze, but focus could turn weakness into strength. By the time the last thief had been secured, the village erupted in cheers. Mariam stood in the center, exhausted, her hands bruised and blackened from firewood and herbs, yet a profound sense of triumph filled her. In the following weeks, Mariam's reputation as the village's secret hero grew. Neighbors who had once dismissed her sought her guidance. Farmers came for her mixtures to protect crops. Mothers brought children for remedies. Even the village council requested her presence during meetings to discuss strategies for protecting the harvest. Mariam carried herself with quiet dignity, aware that power did not always need loud proclamation. It was earned in silence, in courage, and in careful action. Yet despite this recognition, Mariam faced new challenges. Rival merchants and envious villagers began spreading rumors. Some whispered that she had stolen her knowledge from elders in other villages. Others claimed her mixtures were dangerous and would destroy crops. Mariam knew that she could not confront every voice. Instead, she focused on results. Every plant that survived, every harvest that thrived, and every child healed was proof of her integrity and skill. One evening, as Mariam was closing her stall at the market, a stranger approached. He was tall, with dark skin and sharp eyes. "I have heard of your work," he said quietly. "I am from the district council. They seek someone to train other villages in your methods. You have knowledge that can save thousands of lives." Mariam's mind raced. She had never imagined leaving Nyaru, yet the opportunity before her was extraordinary. She hesitated, thinking of her children and the home she had built with Oba. But she also realized that her actions had already begun to transform not just her life but the lives of everyone around her. The next morning, Mariam prepared her children for the journey. Neighbors came to offer blessings and advice. Farmer Aid handed her a small bundle of the healthiest seeds, saying, "Take these with you. They will remind you of home and the people who believe in you." Mariam's heart swelled with gratitude. She knew that leaving was not abandoning the village but expanding her ability to help. Her courage had begun with firewood and herbs, but it had grown into a force that could reach far beyond Nyaru. By midday, Mariam and her children set out on the dusty road that led to the district center. The sun beat down on them, yet she felt stronger than ever. Memories of hardship and grief lingered in her mind, but they no longer held power over her. She had faced mockery, fear, and danger, and emerged not only unbroken but respected and admired. She realized that strength was not in wealth or status, but in knowledge, determination, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. As they walked, Mariam noticed shadows moving at the edge of the forest. She stiffened. Could it be the thieves again? Her instincts were alert, but as the figures drew closer, she saw children from the neighboring village running toward her. "Mariam," they shouted, "please teach us how to protect our crops." Relief and pride filled her chest. She realized that her journey was just beginning. Her life of firewood and struggle had prepared her for something far greater. She smiled at her children, knowing that together, they would face whatever came next with courage and wisdom. By nightfall, Mariam and her children reached the edge of a new village. Lanterns flickered in the distance, and the scent of fresh earth and growing crops filled the air. She knew that challenges awaited, yet she also understood that respect and courage followed those who acted with heart and intelligence. As she settled her children near the lantern's glow, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." From Firewood to Legacy, the new village greeted Mariam with curious eyes and hesitant whispers. Mothers peered from doorways, farmers watched from the edges of their fields, and children ran ahead, laughing and pointing at the stranger who carried herself with quiet authority. Mariam's heart pounded with a mix of nervousness and determination. She had faced ridicule, danger, and grief before, but this was different. Here, she was unknown. She had to earn trust all over again. She set up a small corner near the market, where she placed bundles of firewood and her satchel of herbs. Villagers approached cautiously at first. Mariam smiled warmly, showing the simple truth that she meant no harm, only to help. She began by demonstrating her methods on small crops in her own corner. She crushed leaves, mixed powders, and applied them to the plants, while explaining each step in clear, patient words. Mothers leaned closer, farmers asked questions, and slowly, the people began to gather around. One afternoon, the district council official returned, observing her work silently. "Your methods are precise," he said quietly. "You explain them clearly, and people follow your instructions. You have a gift, not just in knowledge, but in leadership. This is why we brought you here." Mariam nodded. She had never imagined that her life of firewood and hardship could lead to such influence. She realized that her courage had grown from necessity, but her wisdom had become a tool to change lives. Weeks passed, and Mariam trained villagers in crop protection and remedies. Her mixtures prevented pests, healed sick plants, and even improved soil fertility. The neighboring villages began to hear of her success. Requests for advice traveled long distances. Mariam found herself traveling to other villages, teaching mothers, children, and farmers how to use the simple ingredients from the earth to protect and nourish their livelihoods. She became a teacher, a guide, and quietly, a hero whose life had risen far beyond the humble beginnings of carrying firewood. Back in Nyaru, news of her successes reached the village elders. They celebrated her accomplishments with pride, realizing that the young widow they had once pitied had become a source of hope and respect. Farmer aides sent messages, seeds, and encouragement. Children who once feared the shadow of her grief now saw Mariam as a symbol of perseverance. Her name carried honor, and even those who had doubted her skill now spoke her name with reverence. But Mariam never let pride cloud her purpose. She continued to work, visiting villages, guiding farmers, and teaching children. Her children grew alongside her lessons. Kato's cough disappeared under her care, and her eldest, Amina, learned to mix remedies and apply mixtures in the fields. Mariam often thought of Oba, imagining how proud he would be. She realized that her grief had never left her entirely, but she had transformed it into strength and wisdom that could protect and nurture life around her. One afternoon, while visiting a distant village, Mariam encountered a group of young girls who had been mocked by their peers for daring to learn farming and herbal remedies. She knelt beside them and spoke softly. "Do not fear being different. Courage is not loud. It is in the quiet steps you take when others doubt you. Knowledge is power, but action gives it meaning. You are capable of far more than you believe." The girls' eyes shone with hope. Mariam smiled, realizing that her legacy would not only be measured by harvests saved but by courage instilled in others. As the dry season approached, Mariam returned to Nyar to check on her home and family. She found her hut simple but well kept, the children thriving, and the villagers welcoming her with open arms. She walked to the market, no longer a timid firewood seller, but a figure of respect. People brought crops to show her, asking for guidance, sharing stories of how her methods had saved their fields. Mariam felt the weight of her journey, the loss, the struggle, the sleepless nights, but it was now balanced by pride and purpose. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mariam sat outside her hut with her children, watching the village light up with lanterns and laughter. Elder Tay approached and sat beside her. "Mariam," he said, "your courage and wisdom have changed more than crops. You have changed hearts. Nyar will remember you, and so will the villages beyond." Mariam nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. She realized that her journey had begun with firewood, grief, and determination, and had grown into something larger than herself, a ripple that spread across villages, inspiring courage, knowledge, and action. As night fell, a gentle breeze rustled the trees. Mariam's children lay asleep nearby, their breaths even and calm. The village was quiet but safe. She reflected on the journey from those early mornings carrying firewood, facing insults, and enduring hardship, to the moment where she had become a teacher, protector, and hero. She understood now that life's true strength did not come from power or wealth, but from the ability to act, to think, and to care when circumstances demanded it most. And in the darkness, as she watched the stars appear over Nyaru, Mariam made a silent vow. She would continue to teach, protect, and guide, She would help villages learn the lessons she had discovered, that courage is quiet but unstoppable, that knowledge is a weapon sharper than any blade, and that even a widow with nothing but firewood can become the secret hero of countless lives. The wind whispered through the palms, carrying the scent of herbs and earth. Mariam closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her journey and the promise of all that lay ahead. The next morning, she rose again, ready to walk the path from Nyara to the villages beyond, her children by her side. She no longer feared the shadows, the thieves, or the skeptics. Mariam had discovered a truth stronger than any hardship, that courage, wisdom, and love could rise from the humblest beginnings to touch the lives of many, and that the smallest acts of care could echo far beyond the horizon. And with that, Mariam, the firewood seller turned secret hero, began a new chapter, one of endless purpose, hope, and enduring legacy. After losing her husband, 22-year-old Mariam struggles to provide for her children, selling firewood at the village market while enduring insults and mockery. One day, she discovers an old family recipe that protects crops from pests. Her cleverness and courage transform her humble trade into a force that saves the village harvests. Facing danger, jealousy, and thieves, Mariam rises from widowhood to become a secret hero, earning respect, inspiring neighbors, and teaching other villages. Her wisdom, from firewood to legacy. Her journey shows that courage, ingenuity, and determination can turn the simplest beginnings into life-changing impact.